Napoleon Bonaparte was determined to conquer the world. The French emperor's troops captured land after land to fulfill their ruler's desire to impose French rule and French culture upon all of Europe and the Mideast. Napoleon reached Egypt and swept it by storm. His next step was to conquer the Holy Land. While Napoleon's forces were marching towards Eretz Israel, the young Reb Nachman of Breslov was in Tzfat, immersed in the holy study of Kabbalah according to the teachings of the holy Arizal. Reb Nachman often secluded himself in an ancient cemetery of Tzfat where so many great sages were buried. There he found himself able to soar spiritually and reach great heights in his service to Hashem. One evening, when he was all alone in the cemetery, he fell into a deep slumber. An old man in white garments appeared to him and said, "Stop your prayers and hurry to Tveria on the Kinneret. There you will be charged with a vital mission." He awoke and remembered the dream vividly. Without delay, he gathered up his belongings and went to Tveria. He rented a small room on the banks of the Great Lake and continued to immerse himself in Kabbalah, prayer, and deep introspection. Napoleon's soldiers were then encamped on the shores of the Kinneret. Shortly before, the French had suffered a defeat near Egypt at the hands of the British Admiral Lord Nelson. Meanwhile, in France, there was great turmoil on the brink of a civil war. Small wonder that the army's morale was at a low point. The soldiers sought to vent their frustration upon the villages near their encampment. From time to time, they would break into the homes of the inhabitants, rob them, and oppress them in various other ways. Once they attacked the house in which Reb Nachman was staying. The landlord was a poor old man who recited Tehillim all day and was supported by his fishermen's sons. "Give us all your money," they demanded. "I am a poor man. I have nothing here," said the frightened old man. The soldiers refused to believe him. They ransacked the house, certain that valuables were hidden somewhere, but they could not find a thing. Angry and disappointed, they seized the old man and beat him. "Where are you hiding your money, old man?" They shouted at him, pummeling him thoroughly. "Where are your treasures?" "I have nothing," he insisted. "Leave me be." His pleas only increased their anger, and they lashed out at him in fury. The old man's cries reached Reb Nachman, who sat in his room. He rushed out and, seeing the band of soldiers, shouted indignantly, "Leave him alone immediately!" Murder burned in the eyes of the hardened French soldiers, but they were struck with wonder at the young man who, unarmed and single-handed, had the courage to stand up to them and dispense orders. Then one of them turned to him and with a sneer said, "Do you want a taste of the same medicine? Come here, we'll be glad to oblige." Their leader leapt forward and was about to seize Reb Nachman, but the moment he looked into Reb Nachman's blazing eyes, he froze on the spot, unable to move a hand or a foot. Two others rushed to his aid, but they too became rooted to the spot. "Give all your money to the old fisherman as compensation for mistreating him," he ordered. The three were suddenly unable to move again. They thrust their hands into their pockets and emptied them out before the old man. But he was still so frightened that his shaking fingers could not even gather up the coins. "Lay the old man to rest in his bed," ordered Reb Nachman. Gently, without word of protest, they lifted him carefully and laid him on his bed. "And now, be gone with you, and woe to you if you dare disturb the peace of the inhabitants again." Wordlessly, the soldiers turned to go. They disappeared quietly from the scene. The story of the courageous young man who had single-handedly and without weapons of any sort subdued a large group of armed soldiers spread throughout the area. The tale reached the French barracks and became topic of the day. The soldiers who had been the villains of the tale did not deny it, but vividly described what had happened. Soon, even Napoleon heard of the story. Napoleon did not relish what he heard, that a simple Jew had put his soldiers to shame. He ordered a thorough investigation of the matter. "And I want the findings reported to me personally," he demanded. Napoleon was skeptical about the matter, but his soldiers, who'd witnessed the scene firsthand, had been deeply impressed. And from then on, they and their fellow students feared to approach the Jewish homes in and around Tveria. Thus, one day, when the Jews saw a French officer accompanied by 2 soldiers approaching their houses, they were surprised. The 3 made their way through the streets until they arrived at the door of the fisherman's cottage where Reb Nachman lived. The 2 privates were afraid to enter, but the officer was under orders to investigate the matter and had no choice but to go in. In a corner of the room stood a rickety bed upon which lay an old man in pain. A young man stood by his side, nursing him tenderly. The officer assumed that this must be the wondrous Jew who had stood up to the soldiers and subdued them. "Are you the man who defied the French soldiers?" he asked. "I only told them to stop beating an innocent old man." "Who are you to tell French soldiers what to do?" said the officer angrily. "I saw no justification for their cruelty towards an innocent person. They had no right barging into a private home, wishing to rob an old man of his possessions, and beating him mercilessly," replied Reb Nachman indignantly. The officer could not help but being impressed by Reb Nachman's self-confidence and firmness. Clearly, this was a noble character, an admirable person. He drew himself into conversation, and soon the subject turned to Napoleon's campaign and his chances for victory. The French officer was amazed to hear brilliant, well-informed ideas flowing from the Jew's lips. Reb Nachman was versed in politics and military tactics and even suggested solutions to difficult problems that had disturbed Napoleon in the course of his wars. Upon his return to camp, the officer gave a glowing report about the young Jew. His admiration was apparent to Napoleon. Now, Reb Nachman often sought solitude in the midst of nature. On moonlit nights, he would sit by the shores of the Kinneret and study. He was so absorbed once that he failed to notice a rowboat swimming towards the shore until it was upon him and its occupants had leapt out and made their way towards him. Reb Nachman rose to his feet and bowed towards one of them. "Greetings, Your Majesty," he said. It was Napoleon himself. The emperor was deeply moved. "How did you know who I was?" he asked in amazement. "The Torah endows wisdom to those who study it," Reb Nachman said simply. Napoleon engaged him in conversation and soon reluctantly admitted that his officer had not exaggerated in praising this young man. He truly was unusual. He was a man of keen perception and understanding. Duly impressed, Napoleon turned to Reb Nachman for advice. "Do you think it is worthwhile for me to continue my campaign towards Asia and attempt to conquer the entire world, or should I return to France and solve its internal problems?" Reb Nachman winked his brow and thought, then replied, "I see that a great future awaits you, but not in the realm of world conquest. You are best off returning to France and using your talents for the good of your people. Know that the road to success entered upon in blood will also end in blood. Wars and battles do not lead to peace, but engender additional war and bloodshed. Furthermore, it is important to remember that people do not make history. Rather, divine providence shapes its course." Napoleon had never heard anyone speak this way and was deeply impressed. However, his craving for glory on the battlefield was insatiable and tipped the balance. He said to Reb Nachman, "I prefer a short but glorious life with dazzling military victories over a long life of monotonous peace." "So be it," said Reb Nachman. "To each his own. Nevertheless, you must not forget, Your Majesty, that the heart of the king and ministers are in the hands of the Creator." Firm in his resolve, Napoleon took leave of the rabbi, but before going, raised one last issue. "Would you be willing to join my staff of advisors?" he asked. "I, too, have chosen my way of life," answered Reb Nachman. "Though mine does not lead to fame and glory, I strive for a life to serve my Creator with all my heart and soul." Reb Nachman wished the emperor well, and each pursued the path he had adopted. Napoleon soared with dizzying speed to the pinnacle of fame. He became the greatest man alive. But his meteoric rise reached its apex very quickly. Then his star faded. He spent the remainder of his life a prisoner in exile. Reb Nachman's life was also short. At a young age, he was summoned to the heavenly academy, having reached spiritual heights rarely ascended by others. He was acclaimed the leader of thousands of Hasidim who revere his memory and follow his teachings to this very day. His grave in Uman draws Jews from all over the world. This story comes from the book A Story a Day, an Art Scroll Youth series, the month of Tishrei, on the eve of the 17th.
Shiribim. Shiribim, shiribom, shiribim bom 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 bom, shiribim, shiribom, shiribim bom 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 bom. Shiri biri 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 bom bom, shiri biri biri bom bom, shiri biri biri bom 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 bom. אל תתייאש, אל תתבלבל, אל תתייאש, אל תתבלבל, אל תתייאש, אל תתבלבל, רק תשמח.